Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today. And as promised, in this video today, I am going to give you my own personal assessment, my critical analysis of Reid Duke's take on Golgari Midrange, the deck we all on this channel know and love. Now, his list is fairly different from the one that I have been playing over the last month and a half or so since my channel has been up and running, but it is well worth looking at for a few different reasons, and the most important reason is because it's Reid Duke. Now, for those who don't know, Reid Duke is a well-known Magic pro, and I don't particularly pay close attention to the pro scene, but I think a lot of people, a lot of dedicated MTG players are in a similar boat to me, where we don't follow the pro scene all that closely. We might watch coverage of tournaments, not religiously, but with at least semi-regularity. And, you know, we get to know some names, and that's all well and good, but we're not heavily invested in the scene. But a lot of people who fit this description really like Reid Duke, and I happen to be one of them. Several reasons for that. Number one, he just seems like a really great guy. He seems like a fantastic sport. He's an extremely talented player, obviously, very dedicated. He's I believe number 3 ranked in the world right now, just barely missing out on Player of the Year across all formats. And he just seems like a credit to the game in every sense of the word, as a human being, as a player, as an innovator, as a deck builder. I mean, there's a reason that it's a meme to talk about how Reid Duke is, you know, just the greatest thing since sliced bread in the format, and it's or in the game as a whole, and it's I think there's some merit to it. Again, this is speaking as somebody who does not have his finger on the pulse of the pro scene all that closely. That said, Reid is not only a player with proven top-tier credentials, he is actually best known as a BGX player in Modern, which of course makes his take on anything BGX something that people should sit up and take note about. Now, traditionally he has been known as a primarily Jund player, but just lately it seems like he's been experimenting with everything but Jund. He played a little bit of Abzan right before Trophy came out. After Trophy, the first BGX content he released was actually Sultai, a couple different takes on a Sultai deck that sought to leverage blue mainly for card advantage like Snapcaster Mage and Ancestral Vision and Jace the Mind Sculptor, cards like that. Sultai decks have always run into the same problem in Modern, where it looks like just an incredible group of cards on paper, and in practice they work a little bit at cross purposes. Now, I do like Reid's, especially his second take on Sultai, looks really coherent, really strong to me, but still running into some of the old Sultai problems. So everybody, or at least a lot of people, have been waiting for him to play Jund, and maybe he's kind of saving the best for last in his mind. But he, as of a couple days ago, brought this Golgari deck out for a spin, and this is what our focus is on this channel. I promise, for the people who play Taking Turns, I'm going to try to get back to some Turns gameplay soon, but I have just been loving Golgari so much. I've been playing a Turns game here and there, but I really can't get enough of the green-black archetype, so that's what we're focusing on for now. And of course, we've got to take a close look at what Reid Duke decided to do with the Golgari build. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And we're going to start off, of course, by looking at the land base. Now, he is only on 23 lands. You can see he's got 19 lands in the column over here, but he's got his 4 creature lands, you know, kind of conceptually considered as a 1-drop, it appears. A 1-drop spell. And that makes sense, because of course you don't invest any mana into it to play it, but you invest 2 to animate it. You know, that categorization makes sense to me. And right out of the gates, we have a really unorthodox decision. We have a full 4 copies of Treetop Village. Now, I've said this a couple times before, I'm going to say it again. If you want to see the most insane Treetop Village performance of all time, check out my video against Boros Nahiri. The Treetop Villages, I only play 2 of them myself, but the 2 Treetops combine, spoilers ahead, to assign 38 points of damage to Planeswalkers. You heard that correctly, 38. Completely ridiculous numbers of damage. And they killed 2/2/2 Night tokens. And they did 12 points of damage to the opposing player, including the swing for lethal. Now, if you're just talking to your buddy, you're in between rounds at a tournament, and your buddy's like, hey man, yeah, my Treetop Villages were great. They did 12 points of damage to the opponent, and they got the kill. And you'd be like, wow, Treetop Village is really putting in work. So again, mine did that in that game, plus they killed 2 tokens, plus they did a casual 38 points of damage to Planeswalkers. It's completely insane. Shows the power of Treetop Village in the context of a Golgari deck, where you are keeping the board clear, you are trading resources really heavily, you're disrupting their hand. A mana-efficient trampling threat with a decent body is great. And I will be the first one to tell you that. I love the card. Don't leave home without it. That said, Reid is playing 4, and that is something I've literally never seen before. A full 4 Treetop Village in a only 23 land deck, again, remember we play 25 in our build, is very unorthodox, and I love it. I think this is a really cool decision. Now, it doesn't come without a cost, so let's go over the costs. Number 1, of course, any creature land is a potential tempo setback, because it has to enter the battlefield tapped, and it can make your sequencing more awkward than it would otherwise need to be. So, playing the full 4 Treetop is definitely inviting a little bit of that on you. I play 5 creature lands because I play 2 Treetop and 3 Hissing Quagmire, so aren't I a little bit more open to those tempo setbacks? Well, yes and no. Yes, just in the raw numbers, I play 5, he plays 4, sure. But no in the sense that I play 25 lands to his 23, so I'm more likely to have an untapped land to facilitate more ideal sequencing when I need to. Now, the other thing to note here, of course, is that Treetop Village only makes green mana, and that makes it very, very underwhelming in terms of casting things on curve, or even casting them at all sometimes, specifically in reference to the double black cost of the Lilianas. Now, that's one major reason that I'm playing more Quagmires than Treetops, is just for access to a more balanced spread of colors. So, can Reid's mana base support for Treetop Village? Well, I haven't run the numbers in terms of applying Frank Karsten's classic article to this, and I'm sure Reid has. I trust that he has. Might be worth doing if somebody's so inclined, but I can see, without having run the numbers, that Reid has made several concessions toward accommodating a full 4 Treetop Village without likely mana screwing himself very often. And one of the things that he's done is play just as many basic swamps as I do in my 25 land base, which is to say 4. He's also playing a Twilight Mire. So the Twilight Mire is a really nice way to knit together these 4 mono-green creature lands with a basic heavy land base. So the Twilight Mire is actually of high value here. I like that a lot. I would also suggest that a card like Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth could perform a similar role. Pros and cons to both, of course. You probably don't want both cards in your deck. It's probably one or the other, right? So maybe we like Twilight Mire just because it's a little more friendly with Scavenging Ooze in terms of fixing the opposite problem of not enough green mana, too much black. So, important to note, though, that Twilight Mire is actually a key component in making this mana base work, in my estimation. The other thing that Reid did is include 2 more fetches than I do. So he plays 6 fetch lands, I only play the 4 Verdant Catacombs. And of course, Marsh Flat serves as a way to get whatever fetchable mana sources he needs. So while he doesn't have as many raw black sources, he has made some strides toward being able to find them or filter them, filter green lands into black mana. Now, he is, again, only on 23 lands. He's got a lot of creature lands, and he's got cards like Twilight Mire and Marsh Flats. What he misses out on by making those inclusions that make Treetop Village more playable and as a full playset is Field of Ruin. You will notice that my style of deck plays a stock copy number of 3 Field of Ruin. I myself play a full 4, and Reid Duke is playing no copies of Field of Ruin right now. Now, can the deck function without it? Yes, of course, it can. But in my opinion, it is a huge missed opportunity to not be including any Fields of Ruin in your Golgari deck in general. One of the biggest attractions to playing simply 2 colors instead of splashing a third is the mana base. And we're not only talking a cleaner and more painless mana base that can play around Blood Moon better and play around heavy effects that tax your land base, like Path to Exile, Ghost Quarter, Settle the Wreckage, Assassin's Trophy. We are also including in the benefits of that mana base a big attraction to the 2-color mana base is definitely Field of Ruin. I will go on record as believing that very strongly. The card is incredible. It is of an incredible use as a value play attacking manlands. Against greedy land bases that only play 1 or 2 basics, you can realistically start totally taking them off of a color, if not out of the game entirely with some sequences. Obviously, it's great against Tron, and it can even go some way toward fixing our own mana, much like these cards like Twilight Mire do. Of course, you need... there are a few more steps involved to make that happen with a Field of Ruin, but that's definitely something it brings to the table as well. So, in my opinion, leaving the Field of Ruin out is leaving a big strength of the Golgari deck out. Now, that said, I understand why Reid did it, because if you look at his land base and you think that he is committed to playing the full 4 Treetop Village, and if you kind of work backwards from that, what can you really cut for Fields of Ruin? I don't think you can cut Blooming Marsh. I think a 4 of is just too good of an inclusion, especially in Reid's build that doesn't go above CMC 3 in the main deck. It only has 1 CMC 4 card in the entire deck. Blooming Marsh is a must-include. I don't think you want to be playing fewer than 6 basic lands, so those are must-includes. Obviously, you need 2 Overgrown Tomb, 4 Verdant Catacombs. And again, so that leaves only the kind of flex slots of Marsh Flats and Twilight Mire. But again, if you assume that 4 Treetop Village was kind of the cornerstone here and everything else is built off of that, Mire and Flats make a lot more sense than Field of Ruin does, actually. And, maybe you could say, okay, he just plays a Twilight Mire and hopes the villages don't hurt him that bad. He hedges a little bit against it with the Twilight Mire, and then you could turn 2 Marsh Flats into 2 Fields of Ruin. Yeah, okay, that's fine, but to me, if you're not playing at least 3 Fields of Ruin and really, doubling or potentially tripling up on that effect, or quadrupling in my case, maybe it is just better to just issue them all together and play a couple more fetch lands. They get you some extra landfall triggers for Tireless Tracker too, So I understand Reid's land base. My position is that it would take a lot to convince me to leave Fields of Ruin out of my Golgari deck, that is for sure. But in context of only 23 lands, and of wanting to really leverage the power of Treetop Village while still being able to have as consistent mana as possible, I think the land base makes sense. But mark me down as a skeptic in terms of leaving Field of Ruin out. Otherwise, I think the land base is really cool, and I think the 4 Treetop is so spicy. I love it so much. It's just hard to see a world in which that coexists with 3 plus Fields of Ruin. But anyway, that's enough said about the land base. Moving on, we have some pretty stock Golgari choices in the 1-drop slot to start out anyway for Fatal Push is just simply where you want to be in Modern, in my opinion. We did see Sol Malka from the, a legend of the archetype, the creator of the BG Rock deck back in the day. Only played 2 Fatal Push. His build was a lot unorthodox with choices like that all throughout. I won't speculate too much further or comment too much further on that build, but so some very, very good players are playing fewer than 4 Fatal Push, but in my opinion, you should just be playing 4 Fatal Push. Modern is the creature format. Fatal Push is still one of the best removal spells in Modern, and Assassin's Trophy actually makes Fatal Push better, because now we can fully leverage Push to its full power, which is playing a playset against decks where it's good, and we still have a catch-all removal spell that covers us where Push falls shy of being able to hit the target. So 4 Fatal Push is no surprise. Now Reid is playing a 3-3 split of Inquisition a 4-2 split of Inquisition and Thoughtseize. Now, 6 1-mana discard spells is also stock. I have said in deck text that 4-2 Inquisition versus Thoughtseize or 3-3 are both viable. He is playing a full 4 Dark Confidant. So, with that in mind, and he's playing a few more fetch lands than average, he's got a more painful progression on average than my Golgari deck for sure does. Therefore, I like him playing 4 and 2, even though in my own build I prefer 3 and 3. I think this is the correct decision in the context of the rest of his deck to go the 4-2 split. Now here at the bottom we see Nile Spellbomb as a 2 of. This is something that I see Reid Duke doing more often across more BGX decks than most players. And I think... So, of course, this video came out when Dredge has just kind of hit the scene hard. It's kind of peaked. Might be starting to fall back down a little bit now, but Dredge, when Reid recorded this video, was probably the deck to beat. So I wonder how much of this is just Reid thinking that this is a strong main deckable value card. It's main deckable Grave Hate. It can grow the Tarmogoyf in worst case scenario. It's just a 2-mana cantrip, basically. But, so I wonder how much of it is him just liking that in general, and I wonder how much of it is a meta call. That also applies to Grimflayer, so would this one of Grimflayer be in the main deck if we didn't have the spell bombs? And how different would his deck look, again, if we think the spell bombs might be a meta call, maybe the Flare is a meta call as well, alongside the spell bombs. Really difficult to say. I would love to know Reid's thoughts on that, but it might also just be the fact that if you want to have a certain number of threats in the deck and you're playing Dark Confidant, you can't play Tasigur, and you probably don't need to play more than a couple Tireless Trackers, so does Flare just kind of make up the numbers? Like, in my initial take on Golgari, my original deck tech, I was also playing a 1 of Flare for that reason. So, interesting little package here of 2 Spellbomb, 1 Flare main deck. Like I said, you could kind of interpret that either way. But, moving back up to the top here, again, like I said earlier, we have 4 Dark Confidants. Now, this is a debate that rages on, and I continue to believe that the people who say that Dark Confidant is bad in Modern, and that you should just only play a Tireless Tracker for card advantage, Bob is a liability, I think they are incorrect. Similarly, there are some people who say that, people are crazy for moving away from Dark Confidant, he must be a 4 of, Tireless Tracker is too slow and clunky, Confidant's clearly better. I also think that's incorrect. I think building around either card is viable, and I think both cards coexisting is viable. I really like this 4-2 split here in a 23-land deck. I think that's perfectly functional. Not much more to say about that. Obviously, the curve has to stay low with Confidant, and I love Tasigur in this deck, so you're leaving that out. But of course, Confidant has plenty of advantages to bring to the table. He's got the full 3 Scavenging Ooze, which I think is pretty much strictly correct right now in Golgari. Like, we can just leverage... the third one is something that we can leverage, A, because we don't have another color to dip into, so we just want to play the very best cards in our two colors, and B, when we're talking about, the full 4 Fatal Push, for example, we're just simply putting a lot of things into graveyards one way or another, and of course Scavenging Ooze can really, really thrive on that. I love the 3 of, I'll play it myself, wouldn't deviate from that. I'd recommend nobody deviates from that right now anyway in the meta. Of course, for Tarmogoyf is always what we're going to see out of a Golgari deck. Now, here is a very interesting thing. This is also potentially just about as controversial as the Bob Tracker debate or the 4 Treetop Village inclusion, and that is only playing 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy, while he clearly has the catch-all removal slots to play 4. Right? Because you could easily say, cut an Abrupt Decay, cut a Maelstrom Pulse, boom, there you go. That's what most people are doing, or something similar to it. Instead, he's on the 2-2-2 split. Now, whenever I see a new card involved in a split like this with its closest competitors, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the deck builder or the pilot is testing the card. It makes total sense if Reid is unsure what his optimal number of trophies will be to try a 2-2-2 split with some tried and true pieces of technology like Pulse and Decay. Definitely could be an option. Or it could just simply be that Reid is somebody who really values the resource denial aspect of the BGX strategy. Last year in the Pro Tour, I think Reid made quarterfinals, or was it semifinals even, with Abs and Midrange when, people were saying that the BGX deck is pretty dead. You should just play Death Shadow if you want to play a Thoughtseize deck. And Reid, of course, proved them wrong. And he was playing Abzan, but he didn't have Path to Exile anywhere in a 75, and of course that was before Trophy. That ended up kind of hurting him a little bit, at least in the match he lost. Again, I don't remember if it was quarters or semis, but he got nut drew, as I recall, like 3 different times by Hollow One. I think he took it to Game 5, and I think he played really well to get 2 wins, but he just was getting nut drew on his 3 losses by Hollow One, and without the 1-mana Exile spell in there, and again, without Assassin's Trophy having been out yet, he was basically like, draw Maelstrom Pulse or die, and even if I draw Maelstrom Pulse, I'm pretty far behind. So, and that's the eternal debate, isn't it? How highly do we rate having the highest level answers, which is cards like Trophy and Path, versus how highly do we rate denying the opponent resources, even if that resource is quote-unquote only a basic land. Now, just having, again, known what style of deck Reid tends to prefer, he seems to rate resource denial highly. So maybe the 2 Trophy is just what he thinks is optimal, right? Just simply operating under that principle of we don't want to give the enemy too many freebies. Now, I do think this split is very valid. I personally will say 3 Trophy is the minimum that you should be playing at the moment. That is just my opinion. Reid Duke is playing 2. Reid Duke is a better player than I am, and Reid Duke has infinitely more credentials than I do. Of course, that doesn't mean he's always right about everything. I think making the case for Trophy as a 3-4 of stock in Golgari is a pretty strong case to make. So, again, open question whether Reid is testing the card with a 2-2-2 split to find out more about it, or whether he really thinks 2 is optimal. I could see either one, honestly, being the case. We mentioned the Grimflare, and let's go to the 3-drop slot. We have Liliana of the Veil and Liliana the Last Hope, both of which are now stock inclusions in the main deck of any Golgari build. It's just a question of numbers. So you will see the 4-1 split like Reid is rocking here. You will see a 3-2 split. You might see as low as a 3-1 split, which is what I've been playing. Or you might see, 3-1-1 with a second Lily the Last Hope in the side. These are all viable. It's kind of a question of meta and preference. Like, I don't know that there's a direct clear answer at the moment. I myself will be considering adding a second Liliana the Last Hope to my main board when I do my November update coming up soon here. I think I might be making that move. But regardless, Rita's on the 4-1 split, and, sure, nothing at all wrong with that. Liliana of the Veil is still fantastic, still definitely a fine 4-of. And, Liliana the Last Hope, like any Planeswalker, is clunkier in multiples, basically, than Liliana. Think just about how unusual it is. Like, we're used to seeing Lily of the Veil as a 4-of, but almost no other Planeswalker sees play as a 4-of, and it's because she can profitably, turn multiple, unneeded multiples into value just by pitching them to her +1. Like, she's just less awkward in multiples than most. So if you're not sure, I guess that's a decent tiebreaker, right? Liliana the Last Hope is more awkward in multiples than Liliana of the Veil. So if you're not sure whether to go 4-1 or 3-2, maybe you just go 4-1. I don't know. But certainly that's a viable spread of walkers there. We mentioned the Tireless Tracker. Again, I like the 4-2 split. He's got a lot of card advantage here. You do worry a little bit with a 23 land build that Tracker is not being maxed out, but again, he's playing more fetches than average. That helps. And as a 2-of, you don't really need to max her out. So, just kind of a fine curve topping value play. But it's really interesting because I used to play Abzan with, again, a low curve like this, 4 Dark Confidant, and only 1 Tireless Tracker. I was never impressed by the 1-of Tireless Tracker, ever, in a 23 land build with 8 fetches. And it was only when I started switching to a higher land count in a full 4 tracker that I truly began to love the card. So how the 2-of will perform here, I don't know. It's still obviously a great one. So, we'll have to see. If people want to test this deck further, or if he releases more footage, maybe we'll get more data. But yeah, just wanted to note that. And then, of course, Maelstrom Pulse. This is one decision that Reid has made that makes me feel very vindicated about my own decision to play 2 Maelstrom Pulse. Now, I play 1 in the sideboard, but I always want to retain access to 2 in the 75. And I don't see many people doing that anymore. I see most people playing it only as a 1-of, and sometimes just that 1-of is in the side. If I had a nickel, man, for every time you hear a BGX player say, oh, better draw my Maelstrom Pulse or I'm just dead. Like, the card is amazing. The card is such a nice catch-all. It's such a nice 2+ for 1 potential, and sometimes it is quite literally your only out, against, Empty the Warrens if you don't have a sweeper effect in, for example. A huge Empty the Warrens. What are you going to do? You're going to pulse it or you're going to die. That's pretty much your 2 options. So, feel very vindicated seeing Reid retain access to 2 pulse because I've been a champion of that for a while. The more I play with this deck, the more I realize I side in my second pulse a ton. It's just an all-star. So, moving over to the sideboard, right off the gates we have another controversial inclusion, a card called Deathmark, which a lot of you might not know even what that does. Deathmark is a 1-drop black sorcery that reads, destroy target green or white creature. Now, it's kind of a strange inclusion in some ways, because you look at cards, you look at the format, and it's not necessarily something that screams out green and white. Like, I think red is the most played color in Modern, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, green and white are both creature-based strategies, usually, but even so, it's like, alright, if it's a weenie deck, if it's a Noble Hierarch or Birds of Paradise deck, or if it's humans or, elves, stuff like that, we have the Fatal Pushes, we have the Decays, we have the Pulses, we have Collective Brutalities. We've got a lot. So why play Deathmark? And then also, there's some bigger stuff that at least Push and Decay can't hit that's green, like Thrag Tusk and Primeval Titan, but hitting those with Deathmark isn't very good. Primeval Titan's going to have haste. This is a sorcery. And Thrag Tusk, of course, is going to get its... it's already got its ETB value, then it's going to get its Leaves of the Battlefield value. So what is this in here for? It's kind of hard to say, except maybe it's just like, all right, humans and spirits are still very, very prominent in the meta. Deathmark is just another 1-mana kill spell that's good against those decks. It's good against Collected Company decks. And it's good against, a reasonable amount of other things. Maybe it is just broad enough that he wants, kind of a 5th Fatal Push, and this is as close to it as he can get. I could see it. It's just a standout as kind of the most unusual inclusion here. Would love to hear more about Deathmark from Reid or from anyone in the comments. It's a really spicy one, that is for sure. Moving on, we have 2 Collective Brutality. This, of course, is a very stock sight in BGX decks, but a couple things about this. Number 1, Golgari specifically can leverage Brutality main decks so well for the same reason we can leverage a 3rd Scavenging Ooze main. We just don't have the other colors to dip into, so having these flex answers can be really, really nice. And the other thing is that I think Brutality is strong enough that I'm pretty confident that you want access to a full 3 in your 75, and Reid only has access to 2. I would love to see him make room for a main deck Collective Brutality in this deck. Leaving 2 in the side, having access to 3 in the 75 seems really good to me. But that's just my opinion. We see another copy of Liliana the Last Hope, bringing him up to a total of 4 and 2. Obviously, she's just a spectacular card. Can't go wrong with her. Kalitas is pretty great right now. You untap with this card against a lot of decks, you're just going to win, as long as you've still got some cards in hand, which you're a green-black mid-range deck, you probably will. Kalitas is great. I think he's a definite strong inclusion at the moment. Not much to say about that, but then we come to Fulminator Mage, and Reid is still playing the full 3. And again, this is a card that I said in a few different videos you have seen people start to move away from, at least to some degree. Now, it's not a free cut, right? Because it's not like, oh, we have Trophy, we just beat Tron now. Not even close. Trophy improves the matchup a lot, don't get me wrong, but Trophy to keep them off Tron is very, very nice in some situations, but remember, they're still just going to make their land drops naturally. Trophy does not actually set them back on lands. They're just going to cast Thragtusk on 5, Wormcoil on 6, and you still have to somehow beat that. So, Fulminator Mage is still really nice against Tron specifically, because not only does it disrupt Tron being assembled, but it also just sets them back a land, and that is huge. Obviously, it's still quite good against the higher curve blue-based control decks and some other decks that really depend on making a lot of land drops to function optimally. Still a great card, but I can't help but wonder if we go back to the omission of Field of Ruin, whether, he kind of has to play 3 Fulminator because he doesn't play Field at all, and because he also only plays 2 Assassin's Trophy. So, like I've said a couple times, I don't think Fulminator's role in this deck is clear anymore. Maybe we should still all be packing 3. It is hard to say, but something certainly worth noting. Moving on to the green column here, we have a pair of chokes. I like that a lot. I do like that a lot. It seems like, he's pretty well equipped against control with, again, 3 Fulminators, 2 chokes. We've got a nice little spread of double Trophy, double Pulse against control decks. Seems pretty good. Of course, against blue-white control, specifically Dark Confidant on turn 2 is great. If they don't Terminus him, they pretty much have to path him, which is going to ramp you nice and early. And if not, of course they could play a card like Oust or whatever, but often he's your best turn 2 play. So Reid seems pretty well equipped against control. He's got 6 Liliana Planeswalkers in the deck as well, all very good against control. So I like the double choke. I personally think the first choke in your 75 is the best one, and the second one loses you some percentage points after that, just in terms of not being as good of a use of a slot as the first one. I still like playing exactly one choke, and I think you should play at least one choke right now. I think it's a really strong inclusion in our deck specifically. Like I've said before, I wouldn't like playing an uninteractive green deck like Elves or Mono Green Stompy and being like, I don't like blue decks, I'm going to play 4 choke in my 75. That's not where you want to be, but in our deck where we can disrupt their resources heavily, we can attack their mana base, and we can protect our choke, by like destroying a detention sphere that they get rid of it with or something like that. Yeah, choke is great. Choke is a great one. So seeing Reid on 2 is not surprising. I don't hate 2, but I think 1 is my own personal preference still. Then we have a Kitchen Finks. Kitchen Finks is a card that makes total sense in a Dark Confidant build. I have played one in the past in Abzan when I was playing Bobs, and I like it here. Again, you could argue for a third Brutality over it, but, why not both? I would say we can still play the Finks alongside a third Brutality if that one goes to the main deck. So, anyway, Finks is Finks. It's a modern staple. We all know what it does and what it's in there for. Moving on to the artifact column. These first 2 things are, just like Maelstrom Pulse, things that I honestly feel pretty vindicated about some of my own decisions to see these cards in Reid Duke's deck. So the first one is Engineered Explosives. Like I've said a couple times before, you'll hear some people saying, I don't like playing explosives in a 2-color deck because you can never set it on 3 unless, Spreading Seas it hits one of your lands or something strange like that, or Blood Moon maybe. But I still think it is a strong enough generalist answer, and I like having access to some of those in the sideboard that I still like it, even though it maxes out at 2 in 99% of games. And it seems that Reid shares my view on this. Engineered Explosives is a great one, and I'm very pumped to see that in his sideboard. Very happy to see he thinks that's a worthwhile inclusion. The same goes for Nile Spellbomb. Now, a lot of people are playing Leyline of the Void now in Golgari decks. I'm not a fan of that personally. I understand why you would, and it's certainly a very powerful card, but it kind of goes against the value nature of our deck, the grindy value, resource-efficient nature of our deck to play a bunch of cards that are kind of do-nothings if they're not in your opening hand and can make for some bad top decks, etc. Again, I see why people do it. But just to give context, we see a lot of ley lines these days, and we see a lot of surgical extractions as well. Most decks seem to be either playing 4 ley line, and maybe some number of surgical on top of that, or they're playing like 2+ surgical, and maybe just 1 Nile Spellbomb, like just a 1-of Spellbomb in the sideboard, none in the main. When I first started off on this 25 land Golgari deck, I played a full 3 Nile Spellbomb in my side. I have since pared it down to 2, but I've kind of really wanted to bring back the third, either side or maybe even main. In seeing Reid with a 2-1 main side split for 3 total in the 75, man, I feel vindicated about rating Spellbomb highly. I truly think this card is a great fit for our deck. Yes, it's not as hard of a hoser. Yes, it's a one-time shot. But again, the value, growing the Tarmogoyf, getting a card out of it, like it just seems to fit our deck so much better. And I don't think we're that cold to the hyper-fast starts, especially now that Bridgevine has proven to not have taken over the format. It's still a deck that's around, or, don't get me wrong, but, Spellbomb is good enough against Dredge, that is for sure. It's a really nice play against Dredge, against Mardu Pyromancer, against Hollow One. A lot of these decks, we want to keep drawing cards. We need to keep drawing cards, and maybe just shutting off the graveyard is not quite enough with Leylines sometimes. Anyway, love that third Spellbomb, and then we see a card that I've been considering as well for a little while, which is Grafdigger's Cage. This is a nice way... now, just to say quickly, I don't know about 2. Similar to Choke, for me, is optimal as a one of, and then the second one is not as good a use of a slot as the first one was. That said, again, you need to see your cards, and BGX doesn't have great card selection, so I understand, in a way, playing 2 Choke, playing 2 Cage, just because you're likely to draw them more. I get it, for sure, I get it. But, anyway, Grafdigger's Cage is just another piece of graveyard hate against a lot of these decks. It pulls a lot of weight against those decks, and it does double duty, against the Collected Company, Court of Calling style decks. Like I said, Cage has been on my radar for quite some time. I might try to squeeze one into my updated list. We will have to see. Again, my preference is for 1, but I love a really diverse sideboard with a lot of 1 and 2 ofs, where we can go deep into the tank in terms of figuring out the optimal builds, the optimal sideboarding protocol for any given matchup. Now, that is just my preference, and again, it does have the weakness of you're not as likely to find any one specific card, but when you play a couple generalists in the side, like Maelstrom Pulse and Engineered Explosives, and indeed Grafdigger's Cage is kind of a generalist card, that mitigates that problem, because even though you only have 1 or 2 copies of everything, you still have 6 or 7 cards to bring in for a matchup, you know what I mean? So, anyway, won't go too much further down that tangent, but those are my thoughts about Reid Duke's take on Golgari. Now, of course, this video is up on Channel Fireball. I will link to it in the description below. I suggest you give it a watch. Reid is a joy to watch play. He explains his lines really well. He's, of course, an immensely skilled player. And yeah, he maintains a really positive attitude throughout most games, and that's, of course, a lot more pleasurable to watch than somebody just getting tilted off the face of the earth. So, please check out the video if you're interested. I tend to watch everything that Reid does, at least in Modern. I don't really play other formats, so the other stuff is less appealing to me. But, yeah. Those are my thoughts on the deck. It's interesting to see, and it's got me, along with some people who've left comments, it's got me a little bit more interested in trying out a Confidant build for the channel. Now, I think that's still a little bit ways away. You can expect to still see me on the 4 Tireless Tracker build for the near future, but yeah, at some point I will be giving these Bob builds a go, going back to what I used to do with a nice low curve and 4 Dark Confidants, and see how that treats us. But anyway, I'm very excited to see Reid Duke playing Golgari. I hope it's not just a case of him saying, I'm going to try every BGX variant there is, and then I'm going to settle on Jund. If he truly thinks Jund is the best, then hey, more power to him. I've got no problem with that. But a big part of me hopes that Reid is going to come out and say, indeed, as he did at the start of the video, he did at least say this, that he thinks that 2 colors is probably the way to go in Modern right now. Splashing a 3rd color comes at a great cost at the moment. So, Reid Duke, kind of hopefully playing some more Golgari going forward, and hopefully we can get this archetype the recognition it deserves and the results it deserves at the very highest level. That would be awesome. But anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on this deck, any changes you make, anything I said that you agree or disagree with, anything that I missed that you'd like to point out. I would love to hear more discussion about the premier mid-range player on the planet's take on our favorite archetype, Golgari midrange. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be going back to making a couple more gameplay videos in the near future. When I get a little bit more free time, and yeah, like I said earlier, check out look forward to the making some tweaks to my deck as well, and you can check that out in the near future, hopefully within the week. So, as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to the channel. I hope you have a great day. I will talk to you soon.